Now I want to read you something from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And I hope I can read it because I don't have a lot of light here. I know what I'll do. I'll use my Kindle Paperwhite. This is really nice. I have the Practice of the Presence of God on here, and I also have The Imitation of Christ, but I happen to have a book right here. So I'll read in this book. I want to read something to you from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And it's called, this chapter is called, Of Avoiding Superfluity in Words. Avoiding too much talking, too much conversation, too many words. It says, flee the tumult of the world as much as you can, for the talk of worldly affairs is a great hindrance, although it is done with the sincere intention. For we are quickly defiled and enthralled with vanity. Oftentimes I could wish that I had held my peace when I have spoken, and that I had not been in the company of men. Why do we so willingly speak and talk with one another when we seldom return to silence before we have hurt our conscience? This is very, very good advice. Let me see if I can put it in perspective for you. There's great vanity in words. When you're around people, don't you sometimes get tired? See, being around people can be invigorating, and it can be a good thing. But for the most part, it's not a good thing, because people are draining. See, the way you are now in your unwashed state, in your fallen state, in your unsaved state, in your worldly state, your concupiscence, but use whatever term you want, the way you are naturally. See, it's not wrong, you can't help it. It's the way you were born. But the way you are naturally, and then having been mistaught about reacting. You've been taught since you were little to react and get excited and become emotional and get excited and laugh and scream and yell at the football game, and you've been and scream at concerts and get all excited. That's what you've been taught. And get angry and so on. Well, when you do, you give up energy. See, just about everything you do, you give up energy. See, the thing on the outside that teases you, the thing on the outside that stimulates you, it serves as a temptation. See, now the person or the object or the ball game that you're watching or whatever it is, maybe probably doesn't even know that it's a temptation. But people just know that they can get to you, that when you react, you're more in their power, that you are more likely to spend money or do what they want or whatever. See, or they think they're doing you a favor by dramatizing things and getting you to react. Or they can't help themselves. You know, my mother used to rant and rave and scream. I realize now she couldn't help herself. That's what her mother had done to her. I found that out when I went with my mother to Switzerland when I was a 10-year-old boy. I was sitting in the living room drawing, and in the kitchen I heard muffled voices coming from the kitchen, yelling, screaming, and sobbing and crying. And it was my grandmother, the chief battle axe, okay? I thought my mother was bad. Whoa, grandmother, just yelling and screaming in the most vicious way, and my mother became like a little girl crying. See? So then I realized, okay, that's what's done to my mother, now she does it to me. She can't help herself. But nevertheless, I reacted to it. I became upset, I cried, and so on when I was a little boy. It's only natural. So that's what happens to a lot of us. So now you go out in the world and you give up and you give up energy. So now let's get to this topic that Thomas à Kempis was talking about. See, this is very subtle. Who tells you that you should avoid too much conversation? Everybody tells you should go out there and talk and be sociable and get involved and have feelings and be supportive. And that's all you hear. You'll hear a one-sided thing. I'm not saying, Brother Lawrence is not saying you should be a recluse or that you should not like people. But what he's saying is that when you go out in the world to do your work, say, or your activities, moderation in all things, said Aristotle.